The full moon hung high in the night sky, casting an eerie glow over the dense forest. Shadows stretched long and twisted, giving the landscape an otherworldly feel. Daniel, an experienced hunter, moved silently through the underbrush, his senses heightened by adrenaline and the ever-present danger. He had been tracking the werewolf for weeks, following the trail of blood and destruction it left in its wake. Each new victim bore the same brutal marks, clawed, torn apart, left as a grotesque warning to those who dared venture into the creature's territory. Daniel's mind was a whirlwind of anger and determination. The image of his sister, Elena, flashed before his eyes, her lifeless body mangled beyond recognition. She had been the werewolf's first victim, and the memory of her death haunted his every step. He had vowed to find the creature responsible and end its reign of terror. Daniel's training and experience as a hunter made him a formidable foe. He was armed with silver bullets, a crossbow, and a dagger, all blessed and prepared specifically for this hunt. He had studied werewolves extensively, learning their weaknesses and habits. Yet the creature's ability to take the form of its victims made the hunt even more challenging. Each transformation left Daniel questioning his instincts, wondering if he could ever truly recognize the beast. Tonight, he felt particularly close. The air was thick with tension, and the forest seemed to hold its breath. The usual sounds of nocturnal animals were absent, replaced by an oppressive silence that set Daniel's nerves on edge. He came upon a clearing, the ground littered with fresh footprints. His heart pounded in his chest as he followed the trail, each step bringing him closer to the confrontation he had longed for. Suddenly, a figure emerged from the shadows. It was a young woman, bloodied and disoriented, her eyes wide with fear. She stumbled into the clearing, her clothes torn and stained with dirt and blood. Daniel's instincts screamed at him to be cautious, but he couldn't ignore her distress. He approached slowly, his crossbow at the ready. "Please," she begged, her voice trembling. "Help me." Daniel's grip tightened on the weapon. He knew the werewolf could take human form, and he couldn't afford to be deceived. "Who are you?" he demanded, keeping his distance. The woman's eyes filled with tears. "My name is Sarah, the monster. It attacked my family. I barely escaped." Daniel's heart ached with empathy, but he couldn't let his guard down. He studied her closely, searching for any sign of deception. Her tear-streaked face and genuine terror tugged at his emotions, but he knew better than to trust appearances. As he stepped closer, the woman's form began to shimmer, and Daniel realized too late that he had walked into a trap. The transformation was swift and horrifying. The woman's body twisted and contorted, her skin stretching and morphing into fur. Her eyes turned from a pleading blue to a malevolent yellow, and her mouth elongated into a snout filled with sharp teeth. The werewolf stood before him, its monstrous form towering over him. With a snarl, it lunged, and the battle began. Daniel barely managed to roll out of the way, his crossbow firing a silver bolt that missed its mark. The creature's snarls echoed through the forest, mingling with Daniel's rapid breathing. He scrambled to his feet, reloading the crossbow with shaking hands. The werewolf circled him, its yellow eyes glowing with malevolent intelligence. It shifted again, transforming into a young boy, his face twisted with terror. "Please don't hurt me!" the boy cried out, mimicking the voice of an innocent child. Daniel hesitated for a split second, his heart wrenching at the sight. The hesitation was all the werewolf needed. It lunged again, claws outstretched, catching Daniel across the shoulder. He stumbled back, pain shooting through his arm. The wound burned, but he couldn't let it distract him. He aimed the crossbow, forcing himself to look past the illusion of the boy. His mind screamed that this was not a child, but a monster in disguise. With a determined breath, he fired. The silver bolt struck the werewolf in the leg, causing it to howl in pain. Its form flickered, then shifted once more, this time into an elderly man clutching at the wound. The transformation was unsettling, each new form more convincing than the last. The werewolf was playing with his mind, exploiting his compassion and humanity. Daniel knew he had to steel himself against the creature's tricks. He couldn't afford to falter again. He reloaded the crossbow, keeping his eyes trained on the werewolf. "I won't fall for your games," he growled, stepping forward. The werewolf's eyes flashed with a mixture of rage and something else. Was it fear? The creature lunged again, but this time Daniel was ready. He sidestepped the attack and drove a silver dagger into its side. The werewolf howled, its form shuddering and flickering between human and beast. It clawed at him desperately, but Daniel held firm, driving the dagger deeper. With a final ear-splitting roar, the werewolf broke away, limping into the forest. Daniel chased after it, determined not to let it escape. His mind was a whirlwind of pain and adrenaline, but he couldn't give up now. The hunt was far from over. Days turned into nights as Daniel relentlessly pursued the wounded werewolf. The forest became a labyrinth of shadows and whispers, each corner holding the promise of danger. His shoulder throbbed with pain, the wound festering despite his best efforts to treat it. Fatigue weighed heavily on him, but his resolve remained unshaken. The werewolf's trail was erratic, leading Daniel through dense thickets and across treacherous terrain. He followed bloodstains on leaves, claw marks on tree trunks, and the occasional tuft of fur caught on branches. The deeper he ventured into the forest, the more he felt as though the trees themselves were watching him, their twisted forms concealing countless eyes. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, Daniel stumbled upon a small, abandoned cabin. The structure was weathered and overgrown with ivy, its window shattered and door hanging ajar. It seemed like the perfect place for the werewolf to hide and recuperate. Daniel approached cautiously, his crossbow at the ready, every sense on high alert. Inside the cabin, shadows danced in the flickering light of a dying fire. The air was thick with the smell of damp wood and decay. Daniel moved silently through the cluttered space, scanning for any signs of the werewolf. His eyes caught movement in the corner, and he turned to see a young boy huddled against the wall, his face pale with fear. "Please help me," the boy whispered, his voice trembling. "The monster, it's coming for me." Daniel's heart wrenched at the sight. The boy's terror seemed so genuine, his small frame trembling with fear. But Daniel couldn't afford to let his guard down. He knew the werewolf's tricks, and this could easily be another one of its cruel deceptions. He kept his crossbow aimed at the boy, his finger poised on the trigger. "What's your name?" Daniel asked, trying to keep his voice steady. "Tommy," the boy replied, his eyes wide with desperation. "My family. They're all gone. The monster killed them." Daniel's grip tightened on the crossbow. He wanted to believe the boy, to offer him comfort and protection. But he had seen too many transformations, too many innocent faces twisted into monstrous forms. He couldn't take any chances. "Stay where you are," Daniel ordered, his voice firm. "I'm going to check around. If you move, I'll know you're not who you say you are." Tommy nodded, his eyes filling with tears. Daniel backed away slowly, never taking his eyes off the boy. He moved through the cabin, checking every shadowed corner and hidden nook. The place was eerily silent, save for the crackling of the dying fire. As he neared the back of the cabin, he heard a faint rustling sound. He spun around to see the boy standing behind him, his eyes now glowing with a sinister light. The transformation was swift and horrifying. Tommy's innocent face twisted and contorted, fur sprouting from his skin as his limbs elongated into powerful clawed appendages. In a matter of seconds, the werewolf stood before him, its maw gaping open in a snarl. Daniel fired his crossbow instinctively, the silver bolt striking the creature in the shoulder. The werewolf howled in pain, its form flickering between that of the boy and the beast. It lunged at Daniel, its claws slashing through the air. Daniel dodged to the side, pulling out his silver dagger. The battle was fierce and chaotic. The werewolf's transformations were disorienting, shifting between various human forms, an elderly man, a young woman, a child, all the faces of its previous victims. Each form wore an expression of terror and pain, a grotesque mockery of their final moments. Daniel's mind raced as he fought, trying to keep track of the creature's movements. His shoulder burned with agony, but he pushed through the pain, his determination unyielding. He struck out with his dagger, the silver blade cutting through the werewolf's flesh with a hiss. The creature howled, its form flickering wildly. With a final desperate surge of strength, Daniel drove the dagger into the werewolf's chest. The creature screamed, its body convulsing. It staggered back, its form shifting uncontrollably. For a moment it seemed to become a shadow, a dark, insubstantial shape that slipped away into the night. Daniel collapsed to his knees, his breath ragged and his body trembling with exhaustion. The cabin was silent once more, the oppressive weight of the forest pressing in on him. He knew the werewolf was still out there, wounded but not defeated. The hunt was far from over, and he couldn't afford to rest. The creature's words echoed in his mind, a chilling reminder of the battle that lay ahead. "You don't understand, do you?" it had hissed, its voice a blend of every victim it had ever taken. "You're not hunting me. You're hunting yourself." Daniel shook his head, trying to dispel the creature's taunts. He had to stay focused, to remember why he was fighting. The werewolf was a monster, a killer, and he was the only one who could stop it. He forced himself to his feet, determined to continue the hunt. The darkness of the forest awaited him, and he knew that he could not falter. The forest seemed to grow darker with each passing night, the trees closing in like a suffocating blanket of shadows. Daniel's wounds throbbed incessantly, each step a painful reminder of the previous battles. His supplies were dwindling, and exhaustion gnawed at his resolve. Yet he pressed on, driven by the memory of his sister and the need to end the werewolf's reign of terror. Days blurred into an endless cycle of tracking and fighting. The werewolf, despite its injuries, remained elusive. It left a trail of chaos, each new victim another haunting visage that seemed to taunt Daniel's every move. His dreams were plagued by their faces, twisted in pain and fear, and he woke each morning with a sense of dread that gnawed at his sanity. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, Daniel stumbled upon a clearing unlike any he had seen before. The trees formed a perfect circle around a large, still pond. The water's surface was like glass, reflecting the full moon in a way that seemed almost unnatural. There was an eerie calmness to the place, a silence that set his nerves on edge. Daniel approached the pond cautiously, his eyes scanning the perimeter for any signs of movement. As he neared the water's edge, he noticed something strange. His reflection in the pond was distorted, twisted into a grotesque version of himself. His face was gaunt, eyes hollow and haunted, his body frail and covered in wounds. He recoiled in horror, but the reflection did not change. A sudden rustling in the underbrush snapped him back to reality. He spun around, crossbow at the ready, but saw nothing. The forest was still, the air thick with anticipation. He took a deep breath, trying to calm his racing heart. He knew the werewolf was close, he could feel it. The clearing seemed like a perfect place for a final confrontation. As he scanned the tree line, movement caught his eye. A figure emerged from the shadows, a young woman this time, her eyes wide with fear. Daniel's grip tightened on the crossbow. He had learned not to trust appearances, but something about her seemed different. She looked familiar, her features eerily similar to his sister's. "Daniel, it's me," she whispered, her voice trembling. "It's Elena." Daniel's heart skipped a beat. He had buried his sister himself, seen her lifeless body. This had to be another trick. He aimed the crossbow at her, his mind a whirlwind of confusion and doubt. "Stay back," he warned, his voice unsteady. "You're not real. You're just another one of its illusions." Tears filled Elena's eyes. "Please, Daniel. You have to believe me. I'm not a trick. The werewolf. It didn't kill me. It trapped me here, in this place. I've been trying to reach you, to warn you." Daniel's resolve wavered. Her voice, her eyes, everything about her seemed so real, so genuine. He lowered the crossbow slightly, his mind racing with possibilities. Could it be true? Could his sister have somehow survived? Before he could decide, the air around them seemed to shift. The temperature dropped, and a chilling wind swept through the clearing. The reflection in the pond began to ripple, and Daniel's distorted image twisted into the face of the werewolf. The creature's eyes glowed with a sinister light, its mouth forming a malevolent grin. Elena's expression changed, her features melting into a grotesque mask of the werewolf. The transformation was swift and horrifying, the creature's true form emerging once more. It lunged at Daniel, claws outstretched, but he was ready. He fired the crossbow, the silver bolt striking the werewolf in the chest. The creature howled in pain, its form flickering between Elena and the beast. Daniel rushed forward, dagger in hand, determined to end this nightmare. The werewolf's claws raked across his arm, but he ignored the pain, driving the dagger into its side. The creature screeched, its body convulsing as it tried to break free. The battle was brutal, each strike and counterstrike pushing Daniel to his limits. His mind was a whirlwind of fear and determination, but he knew he couldn't give up. He had to end this, once and for all. With a final surge of strength, Daniel drove the dagger deep into the werewolf's heart. The creature let out a blood-curdling scream, its body shuddering violently. It collapsed to the ground, its form flickering one last time before settling into that of a young woman. Elena. Daniel staggered back, his breath coming in ragged gasps. He stared at the lifeless form of his sister, his mind struggling to comprehend what he had just done. Was it truly her, or just another one of the werewolf's cruel tricks? He fell to his knees, exhaustion and grief washing over him. The forest around him seemed to close in, the trees whispering secrets he couldn't understand. The reflection in the pond rippled again, showing his own face, twisted in pain and despair. The werewolf's words echoed in his mind, a chilling reminder of the truth he had been avoiding. "You're not hunting me. You're hunting yourself." As the realization sank in, the forest seemed to darken, the shadows growing deeper and more oppressive. Daniel's reflection in the pond twisted once more, this time merging with the werewolf's face. The hunter and the hunted, locked in an eternal struggle, both doomed to repeat the cycle forever. Daniel's mind reeled from the confrontation with the werewolf. His sister's lifeless body at his feet blurred his sense of reality, but he couldn't afford to be paralyzed by grief. The forest around him felt oppressive, every shadow seeming to creep closer, suffocating him. He forced himself to his feet, wiping the blood and sweat from his brow. The chilling realization of the werewolf's words gnawed at him. He couldn't escape the echo in his mind. "You're not hunting me, you're hunting yourself." With each step, the truth became harder to ignore. The faces of the victims haunted him, their eyes filled with accusation. The line between hunter and hunted blurred, and he felt as if he were walking through a nightmare he couldn't wake from. The forest seemed to respond to his turmoil, the trees whispering secrets he couldn't quite grasp. The air grew colder, and the moonlight cast eerie shadows that danced and twisted like living things. Daniel felt the weight of an unseen presence, watching, waiting. Suddenly, a flicker of movement caught his eye. He turned sharply, his crossbow at the ready, but found only the darkness. He moved cautiously, his senses heightened, every rustle and crackle sending a jolt of adrenaline through him. He reached a small clearing, the moonlight illuminating a large ancient oak tree at its center. The tree's gnarled branches seemed to reach out like skeletal hands, and at its base was a stone altar covered in moss and ivy. Approaching the altar, Daniel saw inscriptions carved into the stone, symbols that seemed to pulse with a malevolent energy. He felt drawn to them, compelled to touch the ancient carvings. As his fingers traced the symbols, a surge of energy coursed through him, and he was overcome by a vision. In the vision, he saw himself standing in the clearing, but he was not alone. Surrounding him were the faces of all the victims, their eyes filled with sorrow and rage. At the center stood Elena, her form shifting between her human self and the werewolf. She reached out to him, her voice a haunting whisper. "Daniel, you must break the cycle." The vision shattered, leaving Daniel gasping for breath. He staggered back from the altar, his mind racing. He understood now. The werewolf's curse was not just a physical transformation, but a psychological trap, binding him to the creature in an eternal struggle. He had to find a way to break free. Determined, he searched the clearing, his eyes falling on a pool of water near the ancient oak. The surface was unnaturally still, reflecting the moonlight like a mirror. As he approached, his reflection wavered and then solidified into the image of the werewolf. Its eyes gleamed with a knowing malice, and its mouth twisted into a sinister grin. "You can't escape me," it seemed to say. "We are one and the same." Daniel knelt by the pool, staring into the reflection. He knew what he had to do. The only way to end the curse was to confront his own inner demons, to face the fear and guilt that had been consuming him. He took a deep breath and plunged his hands into the water. The coldness was shocking, but he kept his hands submerged, feeling a pull as if the water were drawing something out of him. His reflection shifted, showing not just the werewolf, but all the faces of the victims, each one a piece of his own fractured soul. He closed his eyes, focusing on his sister's face, her eyes filled with both love and sorrow. "I'm sorry, Elena," he whispered, tears streaming down his face. "I'm sorry I couldn't save you." As the words left his lips, the water began to glow, the light growing brighter until it enveloped him completely. He felt a tearing sensation, as if something dark and malignant were being ripped from his soul. The faces in the reflection twisted in agony, then began to dissolve, their expressions softening into peace. When the light faded, Daniel found himself alone in the clearing. The oppressive weight of the forest had lifted, the air now clear and calm. He looked into the pool and saw only his own reflection, his face tired but free of the haunting shadows that had plagued him. He understood that he had broken the cycle, faced his own fears, and freed the souls trapped by the curse. But he also knew that the battle had taken a toll on him. He felt different, lighter, yet profoundly changed. He had confronted the darkness within himself and emerged on the other side. As he walked away from the clearing, the forest seemed to breathe a sigh of relief. The moonlight bathed the trees in a serene glow, and the night was filled with the sounds of life once more. Daniel knew he had a long journey ahead, to heal and to find peace. But for the first time in a long while he felt a sense of hope. He had faced the werewolf, faced himself, and had come to understand that the true hunt was not for the monster in the forest, but for the peace within his own heart.